What's up, guys? It's Crash, and you've probably heard by now that Tom Henderson has tweeted from some of his sources that it does not appear that Battlefield 2021 is going to be coming to last-gen hardware. And that is a big deal. That could have a drastic effect on the development of the game, as well as player numbers. It could leave an entire segment of the player base out in the cold. But there's an EA patent that could give us some insight as to why, so we're going to talk about that today. So you know what we need to do? We need to start speculating. Wonder if this thing would help my hair grow back in. All right, guys, all joking aside, this is actually a pretty serious deal if this is true, and it could have a large impact on the game in the future. So, as always, I'm going to try to break this video down for you guys. So if there's certain things you're more interested in than others, it will be time tagged down below. What we're going to look at is we're going to look at the tweets themselves really quick, and also some information about Call of Duty in 2021. And then we're going to look at why they would do this. And then we're going to look at what this means for the game. And then at the very end, we're going to go over pros and cons of this decision. So let's take a look at the tweets really quick. In the first one, Tom says, in other news, I still have yet to hear anything concrete that Battlefield will come to past-gen console. Theory, it indicates to me that it probably won't, and the biggest reason Battlefield will come to the Xbox Game Pass on day one is to boost up player numbers. Secondly, much more recently, he has tweeted about Call of Duty. He says World War II Vanguard is going to be held back so bad by previous generation consoles, and from my understanding, they are planning previous gen for both Vanguard and Infinity Ward's next title. So this kind of says Infinity Ward is going to be making the next Call of Duty in 2022. And it kind of gives me vibes of Black Ops 3 that was on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, as well as the current gen back then. I'm going to take a little bit of a look at that later in the video, but let's talk about why they would do this. So as we've heard before, DICE LA is actually working on the live service. And what we know from EA earnings calls and their most recent games, they love live services. So it could mean that they plan on supporting the game for a long time as a live service, and they don't want to be supporting last-gen consoles into the future. So if this game continues on and gets supported for 3 or 4 years, by the end of that time, the old generation consoles will be dying out, and they likely don't want to be spending resources allocating to live services for those older consoles, because they're going to have to be different. The other reason they might be doing this is to focus on the new Frostbite engine that we fully expect to come out with this game and make it the most high fidelity graphics that they possibly can. That's one of the most obvious reasons. And I think I'm going to mention this quite a bit. I also think ray tracing is going to be really important in this game. Ray tracing in Battlefield 5, it was one of the first RTX titles, and actually a new EA patent suggests that they are working on making ray tracing more efficient, and it would be cool if that was able to be used. And it honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if we could make a drinking game about how many times they are going to say ray tracing at EA Play in June. I bet it's going to be a massive part of what they're going to talk about, as the new generation of consoles do in fact support ray tracing. Older generation consoles would also take extra development time, and that did not work well in Black Ops 3. I very much remember the difference between the current Xbox One console at the time and the Xbox 360 version. It was a completely different game, and the older version did not get the same kind of update and love as the current gen back then. So that could be another reason. Also, they have possibly and probably done research on the viability of new consoles and how many people are buying them. And by the time the game comes out, they are expecting a lot more people to have upgraded consoles and or to PC. So my next question is, what does this mean? And I think it means Xbox day one could bolster the player numbers significantly. There are millions and millions of current subscribers that would have access to the game right away with no extra cost as to what they are already paying for Game Pass. And they are likely doing this, like Tom said, because last gen has so many players on it that wouldn't be able to access the game. And it kind of almost, with Tom saying that in his tweet, because if you'll remember, the rumor about Xbox Game Pass day one did not come from Tom. It came from the Xbox Era podcast. I made a video about it. And this is almost like Tom's getting on board with that and saying, yeah, he agrees. His sources might agree that it could be on Game Pass day one. And it also means that ray tracing is going to be a focus. I'm almost 100% sure of that. But in Battlefield 5, it looked really good, but it destroyed frame rates. It wasn't very playable. DLSS 2.0 came out from NVIDIA that really helped frames. But I don't know about you guys, but when I'm playing an FPS, I want the most frames possible. And with the higher frame rates attainable on next-gen consoles, that has to be a focus. And I don't think last-gen consoles will be able to handle the larger lobbies also that they're talking about and maintain that fidelity. But as far as ray tracing goes, there is an EA patent that has been put out this month, a couple of them, that focus on ray tracing and making ray tracing much more efficient. So DICE understands while ray tracing may be pretty and look cool, the frames have to be there too. And these patents suggest that they're looking at new ways to keep frame rates up while you're using ray tracing. And essentially what these patents are, like the TLDR on them, there's a lot of developer jargon in them, but they pretty much just say, we're using this and this method to create more efficiency in the rendering engine when using ray traces. It talks about bouncing lights and a lot of stuff that's kind of over my head a little bit, but the gist I get from it is they are working on making ray tracing more efficient. So finally, let's look at some pros and cons. Now, selfish Crash would be like, I got a PC with an RTX card. I don't care. But the truth is, there are there are likely millions and millions of players that are still playing on previous gen consoles, and it's working just fine for them. And it kind of stinks for those players, and I feel bad for them. So let's look at the pros first, and then we'll finish out the video with the cons. So the pros, the first thing, it would allow DICE to push next gen hardware to its limits. They can fully focus on it. With the new engine, I feel like we could see the highest fidelity first-person shooter we've ever seen before. It could look amazing. Crossplay would likely be easier for them, as the games would be similar builds. The PC, this year's consoles are much closer to PCs than past. So with those platforms being similar power levels, I feel like the development across the platforms could be a lot easier coding-wise. It could be the first shooter where ray tracing is actually viable. It was in Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Cold War, but anytime I've turned those on, the frame rates just become unusable to me. I can't keep it above that kind of 120 frames that I like to have. So this could be the first time where we can have ray tracing and high frame rates based on those patents that we've seen, let's hope. And it would basically allow more resources to be spent on the game rather than spending time porting it to old hardware. Back when they did this in Black Ops 3, they actually had to use different assets and different types of coding in the older version, and that just takes time. So the less time they have to spend on that, the more time they could spend on the current build of the game. So here are the cons, and I think these are very serious and should definitely be considered. There are millions of players that are still playing on perfectly good older generation hardware. And I feel like there's many players that won't upgrade for one game. So like he said earlier in his tweets, Tom Henderson is saying Call of Duty is going to keep developing for older gen hardware. And I could see a scenario where a person says, you know what? I'm just going to play next year's COD. It's still a good AAA first person shooter that everybody's playing. All my friends are playing it. And I can still play with people on PC and next gen hardware. So I'm not going to spend, $500 or $600 or $700 on a new console for just one game, while there's still other games that I can stay and play. That could hurt player numbers. And I mean, one of the biggest cons is people can't even get the new hardware. It is still difficult to get Xbox Series X and PS5s at MSRP and not from scalpers and things on eBay. And hopefully this gets better by, holiday 2021 when we expect Battlefield to be released. But outside of those numerical factors, it also kind of puts off a vibe that DICE doesn't care about the last gen player base. And that's likely not the case, but it still sends that image just a little bit. And it can honestly frustrate people and influence their purchase decisions. So when those people, several years down the road do decide to upgrade, maybe, you know what? I don't want to buy Battlefield because they kind of left us in the dust back in 2021. And finally, in my opinion, it could really bolster the COD numbers because they are going to develop games all across the platforms, and all of them last gen, current gen, and PC. And I mean, it could lead to a Cyberpunk 2077 issue with the last gen being unplayable, but their numbers are going to be massive because they're basically covering all the bases. And a lot of the people, the millions of people on last gen hardware will, I mean, only have one choice for AAA FPS games this year. There's Halo Infinite coming out, but that's only going to be for Xbox. So all of the PS4 owners will essentially have Call of Duty because Battlefield won't be on there and Halo won't be on there. And that pretty much sums it up for AAA first-person shooter games. So I think COD could really see a boost from this if Battlefield does in fact go this route. Guys, that's all I had for today. I did my best to kind of organize all my thoughts because when I heard this, I had a ton of thoughts. So I tried to keep it organized for you guys. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next one.